We're glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. I am Felicity Ezewuike. Now, one of the darkest episodes in world history occurred in Rwanda 30 years ago. While there's been strong recovery and economic growth in the years since, the scars remain. In April of 1994, what became known as the Rwandan Genocide began. On this day, that year, people were being brutally slaughtered. Over the course of 100 days, members of the majority Hutu ethnic group killed an estimated 800,000 minority Tutsis, moderate Hutus, and members of a third ethnic group, the Tutsis. The figures are even pushed as far as 1 million. Mass graves are still being found in 2024. It is believed that a combination of colonial-era favoritism towards the Tutsis, a media landscape that was ripe for spreading hate, and the slowness of the international community to respond to the crisis fueled the genocide. On April 7, 2024, while addressing dignitaries and world leaders who had gathered in Rwanda's capital, Kigali, to commemorate the bloodshed, President Paul Kagame blamed the inaction of the international community for allowing the 1994 genocide to happen at all. Questions, however, remain whether genuine reconciliation has been achieved under the long rule of Kagame, whose rebel movement stopped the genocide and seized power. To review progress made and what further actions are needed is someone with first-hand experience joining us. My guest is Claude Gatebuke, I hope I got that right, a Rwandan genocide survivor and the author of the book Survivors Uncensored, 100 plus testimonies from survivors of the Rwandan genocide, as well as pre- and post-genocide Rwanda, inspiring stories of resilience and humanity. He is also the co-founder and executive director of the African Great Lakes Action Network. He joins us from Nashville, USA. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's Gatebuke.
Gatebuke. I practiced it a few minutes before coming on the air. All right, so the default first question would be to ask a brief review of the genocide. But I won't want us to start today because most of us are familiar with what transpired. Rather, I want you to help us establish a viable foundation for today's conversation by talking us through some of the key factors that led to the genocide.
So the genocide happened in the context of war. And when that war started, there was a war that started in 1990. And it has, it's also, there is a historical background to it. Rwanda has 3 different ethnic groups.
Okay, Claude, I was actually trying for us to skip that part because I know that it's something that some persons, most of our viewers are familiar with when you talk about genocide in Rwanda. So what I want you to refresh our minds on are some of the key factors that actually led to the genocide.
Okay, so one is the history of, as I said, it's, I'm not going to get into the whole history, but the historical privileging of Tutsis by the colonialists, first the Germans and the Belgians, which resulted in a revolution in 1959 that exiled, among many, Paul Kagame, who was a toddler. His parents were exiled. And then 30 years later, they formed a rebel group that started a war from Uganda in 1990. And during that time, so factors contributing to the genocide include all of those historical grievances, the exiled folks who were unable to return to Rwanda for 30 years. And then there was the war, the atrocities committed during that war, including massacres, terror attacks in markets and buses, the displacement of over 1 million people in a country of 8 million at the time, were all exacerbating factors. And then there were a series of political assassinations. The one that actually set off the genocide was the assassination of 2 presidents. At the time, the rebel group led by Paul Kagame and the Rwandan government, which was, the rebel group was mostly Tutsis, the government was mostly Hutus, they had signed a peace deal, a power sharing agreement that would allow both of them to share power and be in governance of the country. But on April 6, 1994, while they were having discussions, the president of Rwanda came back to Rwanda and his plane was shot down and it killed him and the Burundian president and everybody on board. That is the event that started the genocide. And after that, the killings spread like wildfire with mobs of extremist Hutus going after Tutsis and killing them all over the country. And of course, another thing that was happening that is not to be ignored was the systematic and organized massacres that were also being committed by the RPF, these are things that we've documented in our book from direct testimony of people. And the RPF was also committing massacres, but they were more systematic and they were able to like bury people in some of these mass graves that we're talking about today, and some of those people that are being unearthed today. But the big contributing factors, the major one was the 4-year war that led up to the genocide. That's what exacerbated the ethnic tensions. As a child, I didn't actually know what ethnic group I belonged to because that was not a big, it was not a subject of conversation until that war started. And I remember when they asked me what ethnic group I was, I said, I'm Christian. And they laughed. And when I went home and asked my parents, hey, but what's wrong with being Christian? I told them that was what I felt my ethnicity was. My sister went, oh, Claude, you're so stupid. You should have told them you're Catholic. So that is to the extent that not only me and my sister, but other kids my age at the time were oblivious to the ethnicity. It wasn't until that war started that we actually started to understand that there were all of these differences. And of course, myself, I ended up, going through seeing some horrible things, including almost getting killed, being ordered to dig my own grave, me and my mother, and eventually escaping, but not escaping the memories of what I saw or even heard, the screams of people who were screaming for help. So that is a little bit of not only some of the major contributing factors, but also some of the players and a little bit of my own experience.
I mean, those terrible memories are not things you can erase. No matter how hard you try, you can only learn to live with it as best as you can. And to your credit, you've made a lot of effort. You've made good with what you have. You've turned bad to good in trying to educate people and share the memories in the hopes that doesn't happen again. Some effort towards accountability, to give some sense of justice being served for those who died, has been documented in the media. From what has been done, are you satisfied that some progress is being made towards ensuring that perpetrators of the genocide are brought to book?
There are some efforts that I appreciate in the sense that at least in some cases, people were able to figure out what happened to their families. I think that's important. That was important when it came to the traditional Gacaca courts. However, I'm completely unsatisfied with it because it was then hijacked and used as a political tool for repression for people who the government wanted to get rid of and imprison for whatever reason, to take their properties and things like that. And also many survivors who refused to testify, to provide false testimonies, ended up in prison. And the other piece that's missing is, Rwanda is a country where more than 80% of the population are Hutu people. And there were thousands of Hutus who were killed, not only during the genocide, but before and after the genocide, who were not able to take part in that process as sharing their grievances. They were not able to share those grievances. And I think in order to move forward, in order for Rwanda to successfully reconcile and have lasting peace, there has to be truth. All truth has to be told. All experiences have to come out. And all perpetrators must be held accountable, including the RPF, which is led by Paul Kagame, for the atrocities that they committed. And that is not something that I think is going to be easy to do, given that we still have some of the perpetrators that are in power.
All right. Some effort, you agree, has been made, even though, I mean, it can be better. But let's look at Rwanda, your country, as a whole. How would you assess the healing process as a nation since that terrible experience? Would you say milestones has been achieved, or maybe, for instance, some of the factors that led to the process, to the genocide in the first place, has maybe been addressed or is being addressed?
I would say, like I say, the one of the biggest, most important thing was for people to figure out and find out what happened to their families through the traditional processes, the local process, and also the persecutions. I think that's a major thing because survivors always wonder what happened to their families. I I also think the people themselves have done a lot of work in terms of moving forward. I would not. I'm not willing to go as far as lauding the government, knowing how people are mistreated, including Tutsi survivors who, when they speak up about things that's happened to them, end up in prison. People like Aimable Karasira, university professor and musician, who's, when he tells his story in its full entirety, ends up in prison instead of being given justice. There's so many people, so many cases of that way that I think in order to heal, the space has to be opened up. There's an issue of speech in Rwanda where people are not able to say their experiences in their full entirety. And until that happens, I think the healing, people will heal on their own, and people have made a lot of strides, but there is a long way to go when it comes to government policies and how the government treats people who say things, state facts.
But it is tricky, isn't it? Because one of the key players in that period, President Kagame, is still in power. You did share some concern about how that is playing out in terms of accountability. So would you really, in all honesty, laud any effort put forward by this group of people, those that are still yet to make account of their part in the genocide? Would you really have any assessment for them in terms of moving forward, or until they too, account for their part in the activities that we're talking about, then you can feel some sense maybe of justice being done?
I think when it comes to, for the most part, it happens and it comes forward. There are people who have made revelations and shared, like, and testified about things that they were a part of, and expressed remorse and regret that were a part of the power establishment. I think those are contributing to the healing, because it also helps people know that we're not crazy. They're not crazy to have lived these experiences. Those are real things. Now, when it comes to, it's really hard, the question you're asking is hard to have a perpetrator, administering justice, because a lot of times what happens, it's always partial. So there's been some, I will say, there are some perpetrators that were held accountable, and rightfully so. But at the end of the day, when you also have some of the perpetrators that are doing it and they're basically covering up their own part in it, it makes it really hard to have complete accountability and justice. But I do believe that it's going to come. It's going to happen because of the resilience of the people, and the fact that the people are just, they continue to find ways to speak out and put their stories out and document them, so that eventually accountability will come. But it's come slow. It's been slow, and obviously 30 years is not a long time considering the types of atrocities that took place. I do think that a lot of people have found ways to also live with it, in spite of all of the pain and trauma and the re-traumatizing they may have to endure on a day-to-day basis.
There is one narrative that keeps coming up when we talk about what happened in Rwanda, and that's the role of the international community. That was brought to the fore again by President Kagame in his statement when he referenced contempt and cowardice, or is a cowardice now, of the international community towards the escalation of the crisis. I want you to briefly help us review the role of the international community, what they have done since in the past 30 years to acknowledge their part and to help in seeking justice.
So the international community definitely was a major failure when it comes to the genocide in Rwanda. During that genocide, there would be hundreds of us or thousands of us in places, and the foreign other countries would come and they would airlift like one white person out of thousands of people, and the people would end up getting killed. But the bigger picture was, on one hand, with the government, we had we had the France supporting the Rwandan government. On the other side, you had the US and the UK supporting the RPF rebels. And that also, obviously, you get a lot of weapons if you have those powerful nations behind you. What they acknowledged was that they let Rwandans down and they didn't know what was happening, but they knew. In fact, there is a document dated April 30th, 1994, that was written by the RPF, which is led by Paul Kagame, that said, we do not want an intervention by the international community. And in fact, if anybody comes, we will shoot them or we will engage them. The document doesn't exactly say they will shoot them, but they will have a confrontation with them. This document is actually in the UN archives. I have the document, and it's painful to see that just 3 weeks into the genocide, the RPF was saying, don't nobody come and intervene into this, and the international community accepted it. So they have failed. And secondly, and when it comes to justice, the international community continues to be slow to act on a lot of the atrocities that have been documented. They continue to, there was a UN tribunal that tried former leaders of Rwanda, and it turned into a victor's justice court versus a court of justice. To this day, I think the efforts for reconciliation could be helped if, for example, one of the key elements in the whole genocide was to be pursued seriously, and that is the shooting and killing of the two presidents, the Burundian and the Rwandan president, because that is the event that actually set off the genocide. So for me, I also do think that the international community's actions have been cowardly. We're back during the genocide, and also, during all of these years, there has really not been a lot of recovery, and the recognition to not do something is not the same as, no, we actually did these things. We messed up here.
Okay, I'm actually trying to reference something I read about. Is it a tribunal now that tried some of those accused of genocide, and some were imprisoned. There were those who were later found to have died years before their cases came up. I'm trying to find the name of that reconciliation.
It's the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda.
Yes, yeah. So would you say that's made any dent in the effort to ensure accountability?
Well, their mandate was to try crimes.
Okay, sorry. Where I was actually going with that was, when you say the international, you're not quite happy with them, how the UN is part of the international community, are they not? So if they're a part of that reconciliation tribunal, let me use that for want of, I can't actually remember the exact phrase now.
That was part of the mandate.
Yeah, so would you say that a tribunal didn't achieve anything?
They achieved some because some of the people who were found guilty were guilty of the crimes. Some of the people who were let off were not guilty of the crimes, and so that's a good thing. But which to answer your question more in a way that the audience will understand, is their mandate was supposed to be from January 1st to December 31st of 1994. The crimes committed there, major crimes, genocide, mass atrocities, crimes against humanity, war crimes. And it was partial justice, what we got from the UN. And they were supposed to make a contribution toward reconciliation, but there are grievances all over the place. The government of Rwanda is not happy with them. The people who are tried are not happy with them. The survivors are not happy with them, just because the whole process was partial, and there's still so many grievances. And some of the investigations that were started were actually stopped before they even finished investigating some of the perpetrators, especially when it came to the RPF crimes.
All right, just to bring, I was trying to reference something for our dear viewer, so you don't think maybe I'm crazy. ICTR is the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. That was the tribunal I was trying to remember that did something in trying to get justice. So holistically, how would you say the genocide has shaped Rwanda's political, social, and economic landscape in the last 30 years? Were there lessons learned at all?
For sure. A lot of lessons learned. I think a lot of Rwandans understand now that we've got to do everything possible to prevent from any grievances being resolved by violence. The other thing that's happened in the whole landscape is that genocide has shaped everything. I mean, the reason why people are not free in Rwanda is because when you start to speak, you're accused of having genocide ideology, or you actually go to jail, like some of these genocide survivors that I'm talking about that are in jail for speaking about their own experiences. But also it's being used in the international community, where Rwanda continues to get sympathy, even when, for example, today, I mean, Rwanda and Uganda have invaded the Congo, and they continue to get away with it. There's no accountability, because every time somebody speaks up on it, they're like, well, you didn't do anything during the genocide. So it's not only shaped the political landscape in Rwanda, but also in the region and globally. I do think also the lessons learned are that many of us know that when something is happening and there's injustices happening, speak up. Those of us who have the opportunity to do that, regardless of how dangerous it may be, do that, because it could prevent great harm by us doing that.
All right, I guess we might just have to leave it there. I have a few more questions, but we're out of time for this conversation. So, Claude, thank you very much for speaking with us. We appreciate your time and the work that you do with ensuring that this memory, we don't forget the lessons that it came with. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.